Marcus Sterling adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his black Bentley. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the parking lot, making everything look cold and unwelcoming. He had come here for a routine board meeting with the hospital's administration, another acquisition to add to his growing empire of healthcare facilities. At 45, Marcus had built Sterling Healthcare Group from nothing into a billion-dollar corporation. He owned 17 hospitals across 3 states, each one a carefully calculated investment that generated massive profits. To him, hospitals were businesses first, healing centers second. Every decision was filtered through spreadsheets and profit margins. The October wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and antiseptic as he walked toward the main entrance. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his assistant, stock updates, and meeting reminders. Marcus lived in a world of numbers, deals, and power lunches. Human suffering was just another line item on a balance sheet. He had scheduled this visit to Memorial General Hospital at 9 p.m. deliberately. Late meetings meant fewer people around, less chaos, and more focus on the business at hand. The hospital was struggling financially, making it perfect for a hostile takeover. Marcus had done this dozens of times before. Buy low, cut costs, maximize profits, move on. As he approached the emergency room entrance, something caught his attention. A figure sat hunched on a concrete bench near the ambulance bay, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. In the dim lighting, he could make out a young woman in a server's uniform, her dark skin glistening with tears that caught the overhead lights. Marcus paused, his hand on the glass door. His first instinct was to ignore the scene and continue with his business. Other people's problems were not his concern. He had learned long ago that emotional involvement was a liability in the corporate world. Success required cold calculation, not sympathy. But something about the woman's posture, the way she held her head in her hands, made him hesitate. She looked so small and vulnerable against the massive hospital building. Her uniform suggested she worked at one of the nearby restaurants, probably earning minimum wage and struggling to make ends meet. The businessman in Marcus told him to walk away. He had important matters to attend to, millions of dollars at stake. But curiosity, a trait that had served him well in business, made him linger. What could drive someone to weep so desperately outside an emergency room at this hour? Through the glass doors, he could see the controlled chaos of the ER. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, doctors consulted charts, and patients waited in various states of distress. This was the reality of healthcare that Marcus rarely witnessed firsthand. His boardroom meetings and financial reports kept him insulated from the human drama that unfolded in these corridors daily. The woman on the bench wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but fresh tears immediately replaced the ones she had cleared away. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out a crumpled tissue. Her movements were slow and exhausted, as if she had been sitting there for hours. Marcus found himself studying her face in the pale light. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes that even in distress held a remarkable depth. There was something about her that reminded him of someone from his past, though he couldn't quite place the memory. A memory flickered in his mind. His own mother, 20 years ago, sitting in a similar hospital waiting room. She had been diagnosed with cancer, and the family had spent countless nights in places just like this. The smell of disinfectant, the sound of machines beeping, the feeling of helplessness as medical bills piled up like insurmountable mountains. That experience had changed Marcus fundamentally. Watching his mother suffer and die while insurance companies found ways to deny coverage had lit a fire in him. But, instead of channeling that pain into compassion, he had transformed it into ruthless ambition. If the healthcare system was broken, he would master it and profit from it. Now, looking at this young woman's tears, Marcus felt an uncomfortable stirring in his chest. A feeling he had buried so deep that he had almost forgotten it existed. The memory of what it felt like to be powerless, afraid, and desperate for help that might never come. His phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. A text from his assistant reminded him that the hospital board was waiting in the conference room. Time was money, and Marcus had built his fortune on never wasting either. He needed to focus on the acquisition, not get distracted by random strangers and their problems. Yet he found himself moving toward the bench instead of the hospital entrance. His expensive shoes clicked against the concrete as he approached the crying woman. She looked up at the sound, her eyes wide with surprise and embarrassment. In the better light, Marcus could see that she was even younger than he had thought, perhaps 23 or 24. "Are you all right?" The words came out before Marcus could stop them. He immediately regretted the question. Of course she wasn't all right. People didn't sit outside emergency rooms crying because everything was fine. The woman quickly wiped her eyes again, trying to compose herself in front of this well-dressed stranger. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I was just—" "You weren't disturbing me," Marcus said, surprised by his own gentleness. In business meetings, his voice was sharp and commanding. But something about this moment called for a different approach. "I was just wondering if there's anything I can do to help." She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. His expensive suit and confident bearing clearly marked him as someone from a different world. Why would a man like him care about her problems? "It's my little brother," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Carlos. He's been sick for weeks, and tonight he got so much worse. The fever wouldn't break, and he started having trouble breathing. I brought him here, but—" Her words trailed off, and fresh tears began to flow. Marcus waited, feeling increasingly uncomfortable but unable to walk away. There was something about her pain that felt familiar, even though he had spent years insulating himself from such raw emotion. "But what?" he asked quietly. "The insurance," she whispered. "We don't have good insurance. My job at the diner doesn't provide health benefits, and the state insurance is so limited. They're saying Carlos needs tests and treatments that aren't covered. The doctor thinks it might be pneumonia, but they want to run more tests to be sure." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He knew exactly how this story went. The endless paperwork, the denials, the delays while sick people suffered. It was a system designed to maximize profits for companies like his while minimizing payouts to patients who needed help. "How much?" he asked. "What?" She looked confused. "How much do the tests cost?" She stared at him for a long moment, clearly wondering if this was some kind of trick. The doctor said it could be $1,500 for everything they want to do. Blood work, chest x-rays, maybe a CT scan if they find something concerning. "That's more money than I make in 2 months. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. The woman's eyes widened as she saw him counting bills. He had about $800 in cash, which he handed to her without hesitation. "This should help with the immediate costs," he said. "For the rest, give them this." He handed her one of his business cards. "Tell them to call my office tomorrow and we'll work out the remaining balance." The woman stared at the money in disbelief. "I can't take this," she said. "I don't even know you. Why would you do this?" Marcus found himself at a loss for words. Why was he doing this? It went against every principle that had guided his business success. Emotional decisions led to poor outcomes. Charity was a luxury for people who could afford to be sentimental. "Sometimes we all need help," he said finally. "What's your name?" "Rosa," she said, still holding the money as if it might disappear. "Rosa Martinez. And this is incredibly kind. I promise I'll pay you back somehow." "Don't worry about paying me back," Marcus said. "Just take care of your brother." Rosa stood up quickly, clutching the money to her chest. "Thank you," she said, tears of gratitude replacing the tears of despair. "Thank you so much. I need to get back inside to Carlos." She hurried toward the emergency room entrance, then stopped and turned back. "What's your name?" she called out. "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Sterling." Rosa nodded and rushed inside, leaving Marcus alone in the parking lot. He stood there for several minutes, staring at the spot where she had been sitting. Something fundamental had shifted inside him, though he couldn't yet identify what it was. His phone rang, jolting him back to reality. It was his assistant, wondering where he was for the board meeting. Marcus looked at his watch and realized he was already 20 minutes late. The hospital executives would be getting impatient, and this deal was worth millions. As he walked toward the main entrance, Marcus tried to refocus on business. But Rosa's face kept appearing in his mind, along with memories he had buried long ago. His mother's hand in his as she lay dying. The sound of machines that couldn't save her. The feeling of rage and helplessness that had driven him to build his empire. The hospital's main lobby was quiet at this hour, with only a skeleton staff manning the information desk and security station. Marcus took the elevator to the third floor, where the administrative offices were located. The conference room was exactly what he expected: it sterile, corporate, designed for making deals rather than saving lives. 5 board members sat around a polished table, their faces showing varying degrees of irritation at his tardiness. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the chief medical officer, looked particularly unhappy. She had been the most vocal opponent of the acquisition, arguing that Sterling Healthcare's cost-cutting measures would compromise patient care. "Mr. Sterling," said board chairman Robert Chen, "we were beginning to worry you had changed your mind about tonight's meeting." "Not at all," Marcus replied smoothly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I apologize for the delay. I was observing the hospital's operations." It wasn't entirely a lie. He had been observing, just not in the way they might expect. Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The meeting proceeded as these meetings always did. Financial projections, cost-benefit analyses, discussions about redundant staff and unnecessary services. Marcus found himself going through the motions, but his mind kept drifting back to Rosa and her brother Carlos. "Our biggest expense is the emergency room," explained CFO Michael Torres. "Too many uninsured patients, too many unpaid bills. Under Sterling Healthcare's model, we could significantly reduce those losses." Marcus nodded automatically, but the words felt different now. Too many uninsured patients wasn't just a line item anymore. It had a face, a name, a story of desperation and love. "The emergency room is required by law to treat patients regardless of their ability to pay," Dr. Hayes interjected. "We can't simply turn away people who need help." "Of course not," Marcus replied. "But we can streamline operations, reduce unnecessary tests, and implement more efficient protocols." Even as he spoke the words, Marcus felt their hollowness. Streamline operations meant fewer nurses. Reduce unnecessary tests meant doctors would have less information to make diagnoses. Efficient protocols often meant faster patient turnover, regardless of whether people were truly ready to leave. The presentation continued for another hour, with Marcus providing the responses he had given dozens of times before. But something had changed in his delivery. The words came automatically, but his heart wasn't in them. As the meeting concluded and papers were signed for the preliminary acquisition agreement, Marcus felt a strange sense of emptiness. This should have been a moment of triumph. Another successful deal, another hospital added to his portfolio, another step toward even greater wealth and power. Instead, he found himself thinking about a young woman named Rosa, probably still sitting beside her sick brother's bed, wondering how she would manage the medical bills even with his unexpected help. After the board members left, Marcus remained in the conference room, staring out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere in this building, real human drama was unfolding. People were fighting for their lives, families were praying for miracles, and medical staff were doing their best with limited resources. For the first time in years, Marcus Sterling wondered if he was on the right side of that fight. 3 days after the hospital meeting, Marcus found himself doing something completely out of character. He had driven back to Memorial General Hospital, not for business, but to check on a young woman named Rosa and her brother Carlos. He told himself it was simple curiosity. He wanted to know if his money had helped, if the tests had revealed what was wrong with the boy. But, deep down, Marcus knew it was something more complicated than that. Rosa's tears had awakened something in him that he thought he had successfully buried. The hospital lobby bustled with afternoon activity. Visitors carried flowers and balloons, medical staff moved with purposeful urgency, and the general hum of institutional life filled the air. Marcus approached the information desk, feeling oddly nervous. "I'm looking for a patient," he told the elderly volunteer behind the desk. "Carlos Martinez. He would have been admitted to the emergency room 3 nights ago." The woman typed the name into her computer and frowned. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any current patients by that name. He may have been discharged, or..." She paused delicately, knowing that some stories didn't have happy endings. Marcus felt an unexpected pang of worry. Had he been too late? Had his help been insufficient? The possibility that Carlos might have died while he was in his boardroom making deals about profit margins hit him like a physical blow. "Is there another way to find out what happened?" he asked. "You could try the emergency department. They might have records of his visit. But they can only share information with family members." Marcus thanked her and made his way to the emergency room. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping brought back unwelcome memories. He hadn't spent time in a hospital emergency room since his mother's final days, and being here felt like stepping into a wound that had never properly healed. The emergency room was busy even in the afternoon. A tired-looking nurse at the triage desk looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about a patient who was here 3 nights ago. Carlos Martinez. 8 years old, brought in with respiratory problems." "Are you family?" the nurse asked automatically. Marcus hesitated. The lie would be easy, but something stopped him. "No, I'm not. I helped his sister with some of the medical expenses, and I wanted to see how the boy was doing." The nurse's expression softened slightly. Acts of kindness in the emergency room were rare enough to be memorable. "I can't give you specific medical information, but I can tell you that Carlos was admitted to the pediatric ward and has been responding well to treatment. He should be going home tomorrow." Relief flooded through Marcus with surprising intensity. "Thank you. Is his sister still here?" "The family has been staying with him around the clock. Room 412 in the pediatric wing." Marcus took the elevator to the 4th floor, his heart beating faster than he could explain. He had given money to charities before, large donations that earned him tax benefits and positive publicity. But he had never followed up personally, never seen the faces of the people his money had helped. The pediatric ward was a different world from the sterile business environment he was used to. Colorful murals decorated the walls, and the sound of children's voices mixed with the medical equipment. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and hopeful. Room 412 was easy to find. Through the open door, Marcus could see a small boy lying in bed, looking pale but alert. Rosa sat in a chair beside him, reading from a picture book. Her voice was soft and animated as she brought the story to life for her brother. Marcus knocked gently on the doorframe. Rosa looked up, and her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, and overwhelming gratitude. "Mr. Sterling," she said, standing quickly. "I can't believe you're here." "I wanted to see how Carlos was doing," Marcus said, entering the room. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Mind? After what you did for us?" Rosa shook her head. "Carlos, this is the man I told you about. The one who helped us." The boy looked at Marcus with large, dark eyes that held an adult's wisdom despite his young age. "Thank you," he said in a voice that was still hoarse from his illness. "Rosa said you're like a superhero." Marcus felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had called him a hero? In the business world, he was known as ruthless, brilliant, successful. But hero? That was a word that had disappeared from his vocabulary long ago. "I'm just glad you're feeling better," Marcus said, pulling up another chair. "What are the doctors saying?" Rosa's face lit up with relief and joy. "It was pneumonia, just like they suspected. But they caught it early because of the tests you helped us pay for. The antibiotics are working, and Dr. Peterson says Carlos can go home tomorrow if his fever stays down." "That's wonderful news," Marcus said, and meant it. He found himself studying the small room, noting the get-well cards from Carlos's classmates, the stuffed animals that friends and neighbors had brought, the small signs of a community rallying around this family. I've been trying to figure out how to thank you properly, Rosa continued. What you did, it saved his life. If we had to wait for the insurance approval, or try to find the money ourselves. You don't need to thank me, Marcus interrupted. Anyone would have done the same thing. Rosa gave him a look that was both sad and knowing. No, they wouldn't have. I sat outside that emergency room for 2 hours before you came along. Dozens of people walked past me, and no one stopped. Most people don't want to get involved in other people's problems. Her words hit Marcus harder than he expected. How many times had he walked past suffering without acknowledging it? How many roses had crossed his path while he was focused on his phone, his deals, his relentless pursuit of success? Tell me about your family, Marcus said, surprising himself with the question. In business, personal information was only relevant if it could be used to gain advantage. But, sitting in this hospital room, he found himself genuinely curious about these people whose lives he had briefly intersected. Rosa's face brightened as she began to talk. She and Carlos had come to the United States from El Salvador when he was just 2 years old. Their parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving Rosa to raise her brother alone at the age of 21. I work at Murphy's Diner downtown, she explained. It's not much, but the tips are decent and my boss, Mrs. Murphy, is understanding when I need time off for Carlos. She's the one who gave me a ride to the hospital that night. Marcus listened as Rosa painted a picture of their life, modest but filled with love, struggle but also hope. She talked about Carlos's dreams of becoming a doctor, about the evening English classes she was taking at the community college, about their small apartment where Carlos had a corner set up for homework and art projects. What do you want to be when you grow up? Marcus asked Carlos, who had been listening quietly to his sister's stories. A doctor, Carlos said without hesitation. Like Dr. Peterson. He made me feel better when I was scared. I want to help sick people feel better too. The simple sincerity in the boy's voice stirred something deep in Marcus's chest. When had he lost that kind of pure, uncomplicated desire to help people? His original motivation for entering healthcare had been similar, but it had been twisted by grief and anger into something darker. That's a wonderful goal, Marcus said. It takes a lot of hard work and studying, but I think you can do it. Carlos's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Rosa helps me with my homework every night. She's really smart. She could be a doctor too, but she says someone has to work to pay for food. Rosa laughed, but Marcus caught the wistful note in her voice. Maybe someday, she said. Right now, taking care of Carlos is the most important thing. Marcus found himself thinking about the acquisition he was in the process of completing. Memorial General would become part of Sterling Healthcare within 6 months. The cost-cutting measures he planned would eliminate dozens of nursing positions and reduce the availability of charity care programs. People like Rosa and Carlos would be directly affected by his business decisions. The thought had never bothered him before, but now it felt deeply uncomfortable. Rosa, he said carefully, what would you say if I told you that this hospital was being sold to a large corporation? She frowned thoughtfully. I'd be worried, she said honestly. In my experience, when big companies take over, the first thing they usually do is cut costs. That usually means fewer services for people like us who can't afford to pay full price. Her insight was remarkably accurate. Marcus had built his fortune on exactly those kinds of cost-cutting measures. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was asking for her opinion on something he was directly responsible for causing. But, Rosa continued, I'd also hope that the people running that company would remember that hospitals aren't just businesses. They're places where miracles happen, where families come together in crisis, where ordinary people become heroes by helping strangers. She looked directly at Marcus as she said this last part, and he felt as if she could see straight through his expensive suit to the conflicted man underneath. A nurse entered the room, interrupting the moment. Time for Carlos's medication, she announced cheerfully. And visiting hours end in 30 minutes. Marcus stood to leave, but Carlos reached out and grabbed his hand with surprising strength for someone who had been so sick just days before. Will you come back and visit me? The boy asked. Maybe you could read me a story next time? Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. I'd like that very much, he heard himself saying. Maybe I could bring you some books about doctors and hospitals. That would be awesome. Carlos's face lit up with joy that was completely disproportionate to the small gesture Marcus had offered. As Marcus prepared to leave, Rosa walked into the elevator. I know you're a busy man, she said, and I still can't believe you came to check on us. It means more than you know. Rosa, Marcus said as the elevator arrived, can I ask you something? When you were sitting outside the emergency room that night, what were you thinking about? She considered the question seriously. I was thinking about how unfair it all is, she said. How a little boy like Carlos, who has never hurt anyone, who dreams of helping people, could be denied medical care because his family doesn't have enough money. I was thinking about how broken the system is, and how people suffer because of it. The elevator doors opened, but Marcus didn't immediately step inside. What if someone wanted to fix that system? What would that look like? Rosa smiled sadly. I think it would require people with power and money to care more about helping than about profiting. It would require them to see patients as human beings with families and dreams, not just as numbers on a spreadsheet. The elevator doors began to close, and Marcus quickly stepped inside. As the elevator descended, Rosa's words echoed in his mind. She had unknowingly described everything that was wrong with his approach to healthcare, everything that had made him wealthy but left him empty. When Marcus reached his car in the parking lot, he sat for a long time without starting the engine. His phone buzzed with messages from his office, updates on stock prices, reminders about upcoming meetings. The world of Sterling Healthcare Group continued to spin, generating profits and expanding its reach. But, for the first time in years, Marcus Sterling was questioning whether any of it mattered. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself in an emergency board meeting that would have been routine just a month ago. Now, sitting at the head of the polished conference table in his downtown office, he felt like an imposter in his own life. The Memorial General acquisition is proceeding on schedule, reported his chief financial officer, David Chun. We've identified 47 positions that can be eliminated immediately, which will save approximately $2.8 million annually. The other board members nodded approvingly. These were the kind of numbers that had built Sterling Healthcare Group into a powerhouse. Marcus had always prided himself on finding inefficiencies and cutting them out ruthlessly. What kind of positions? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mostly nursing staff, some support personnel, and several positions in the charity care department, David replied, consulting his tablet. The nursing ratios will still meet state minimum requirements, and the charity care functions can be handled by existing administrative staff. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Fewer nurses meant longer response times, more stressed staff, and less personal attention for patients. Eliminating charity care positions meant people like Rosa and Carlos would have even more difficulty getting help when they needed it. Sir? David was looking at him expectantly. Should we proceed with the termination notices? Marcus realized he had been silent for several long moments. Around the table, 8 of the most successful healthcare executives in the region were waiting for his decision. These were people who had helped him build an empire, who had made themselves rich by following his lead. Let me review the specifics before we finalize anything, Marcus said finally. I want to look at the individual positions and see if there are alternatives. The room fell silent. This was completely out of character for Marcus Sterling. He had never micromanaged personnel decisions before, never second-guessed the financial recommendations of his trusted team. Marcus, said board member Patricia Williams, is there something specific you're concerned about? This is the same process we've used successfully at every acquisition. She was right, of course. Marcus had used identical cost-cutting strategies at 16 other hospitals. The formula was simple and profitable: acquire struggling hospitals at below-market prices, eliminate redundant positions, streamline operations, and maximize revenue streams. I'm just being thorough, Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. This is a significant investment, and I want to make sure we're making the right decisions." After the meeting ended and the board members filed out, Marcus remained alone in the conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the city sprawling below him. Somewhere out there, Rosa was probably starting her evening shift at the diner, and Carlos was doing homework at their small kitchen table. Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. "Sir? You have the Riverside Hospital conference call in 10 minutes. Cancel it," Marcus said without turning around. "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day." Jennifer's surprise was evident in her voice. "Sir? The Riverside call is about the expansion project. They're expecting your approval for the new wing construction." "They can wait," Marcus said. "I need some time to think." After Jennifer left, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. He loosened his tie, grabbed his keys, and drove across town to Murphy's diner. The diner was exactly what he had expected from Rosa's description. Small, worn but clean, filled with the smell of coffee and grilled food. A handful of customers sat at scattered tables, most of them looking like they belonged to the working-class neighborhood surrounding the restaurant. Rosa was behind the counter, refilling sugar dispensers. She looked up as the door chimed, and her face registered shock and, then, delight when she recognized him. "Mr. Sterling! What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," Marcus lied smoothly. "I thought I might get some coffee and see how Carlos is doing." Rosa's smile was radiant. "He's doing wonderful. Back in school, back to his normal energy level. He talks about you all the time, about the book you brought him last week." Marcus had indeed returned to the hospital, bringing Carlos a picture book about doctors and hospitals. The boy's enthusiasm had been infectious, and Marcus had found himself promising to visit again soon. "Is he here?" Marcus asked, sliding onto one of the cracked vinyl stools at the counter. "He's in the back doing homework. Mrs. Murphy lets him stay here after school until my shift ends." "Would you like me to get him?" Before Marcus could answer, a heavy-set woman in her 60s emerged from the kitchen. She had graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and shrewd eyes that immediately assessed the well-dressed stranger at her counter. "This must be the famous Mr. Sterling," she said, extending a flour-dusted hand. "I'm Helen Murphy. Rosa's told me all about you." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Murphy. You have a lovely place here." Helen snorted with amusement. "Lovely is stretching it, but it's honest work and it feeds families. That's what matters." She studied Marcus for a moment. "Rosa, why don't you take your break and visit with your friend? I can handle the counter." Rosa untied her apron and led Marcus to a booth in the corner. As they settled in, Carlos appeared from the back room, his face lighting up when he saw Marcus. "Mr. Sterling! Did you come to eat dinner? The mac and cheese is really good here." "That sounds perfect," Marcus said, and found that he meant it. When was the last time he had eaten somewhere like this, somewhere real and unpretentious? As Rosa went to place his order, Carlos slid into the booth across from Marcus. "I've been reading that book you brought me every night," he said earnestly. "Did you know that doctors have to study for like 12 years before they can work in hospitals?" "I did know that," Marcus replied. "It's a lot of work, but it's worth it to be able to help people." "That's what I want to do," Carlos said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "I want to help people like Dr. Peterson helped me. Maybe I'll work at the same hospital where you helped us." The innocent comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. Carlos didn't know that Marcus owned the hospital where he had been treated, didn't know that the cost-cutting measures being implemented would make it harder for families like his to get care. Rosa returned with a plate of mac and cheese that looked nothing like the gourmet meals Marcus usually ate, but somehow tasted better than anything he had eaten in years. As he ate, he listened to Carlos chatter about school, about his friends, about his dreams of becoming a doctor. "Carlos," Marcus said during a brief pause in the boy's monologue, "what do you think makes a good doctor?" Carlos considered this seriously, as he did most questions. I think they have to be smart, but also kind. Dr. Peterson was both. He explained everything to me so I wouldn't be scared, and he made sure Rosa could stay with me even when visiting hours were over. Anything else? I think they have to care more about helping people than about making money, Carlos said with startling insight. Like, if someone is really sick but can't pay, a good doctor would still help them. Because saving lives is more important than being rich. Marcus felt as if the 8-year-old had just delivered a lecture that his entire board of directors needed to hear. The boy's moral clarity was both inspiring and devastating. That's very wise, Marcus said quietly. Rosa taught me that, Carlos replied. She always says that how much money someone has doesn't determine how much their life is worth. Rosa returned to the table, sliding in next to her brother. What are you two talking about so seriously? Carlos was telling me what makes a good doctor, Marcus said. He's got some very thoughtful ideas. Rosa beamed with pride. He's always been an old soul. Sometimes I think he understands the world better than I do. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself drawn into the simple rhythm of the diner. Regular customers greeted Rosa by name, asked about Carlos's recovery, and treated them both like family. Mrs. Murphy emerged periodically to check on tables, refill coffee cups, and chat with longtime patrons. This was community in a way that Marcus had forgotten existed. In his world of corporate boards and business dinners, relationships were transactional. People were valuable based on what they could provide: connections, information, profit opportunities. But, here, relationships seemed to exist simply because people cared about each other. Mrs. Murphy had given Rosa flexible hours and a place for Carlos to stay after school, not because it benefited her business, but because it was the right thing to do. Rosa, Marcus said as the dinner crowd began to thin, can I ask you something? What do you know about the changes happening at Memorial General Hospital? Rosa's expression grew concerned. There have been rumors. Some of the nurses who come in here for coffee have mentioned that there might be layoffs. Why do you ask? Marcus felt the weight of his secret knowledge pressing down on him. Just curious. The healthcare industry is always changing. I hope they don't cut too many people, Rosa said. That place saved Carlos's life. All those nurses and doctors who took care of him, they work so hard. It would be terrible if good people lost their jobs just because some corporation wants to make more money. Her words were like daggers. Marcus was that corporation, and he was exactly the kind of person who put profit over people. At least, he had been until recently. What if, Marcus said carefully, someone in a position to influence those decisions wanted to do things differently? What would that look like? Rosa tilted her head thoughtfully. I guess they would have to decide what's more important, making the most money possible, or making sure the hospital can serve the community effectively. It seems like those two things don't always go together. They don't, Marcus admitted. Sometimes they're completely opposite. Carlos, who had been drawing on a napkin while the adults talked, looked up suddenly. Mr. Sterling, are you the...